talk about this much. Not because I've forgotten, I wish I had, but because every time I try to explain it to someone, I can see the look on their face. That polite nod. The one that says they're listening but don't quite believe it. So after a while, I just stopped bringing it up. But it happened. And there are two other people out there who know exactly what I'm talking about, because they were standing right next to me when it did. This was the summer before 8th grade. I was 13, maybe about to turn 14. I don't remember the exact timing, but I know it was hot. The kind of hot where the asphalt gets soft and the air smells like cut grass and exhaust, and you're sweating through your shirt by 10 in the morning. We lived in a mid-sized suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing remarkable about it. Ranch houses, cul-de-sacs, a strip mall every half mile. The kind of place where nothing ever happens and everyone knows it. There were 3 of us that summer, me, my friend Tyler, and a kid named Marcus, who had moved into the neighborhood the previous fall. Marcus was the kind of kid who was always suggesting things, always the one with an idea for how to kill an afternoon. That summer, the 3 of us were basically inseparable. Tyler had a trampoline in his backyard. Marcus had an older brother who let us use his Xbox. My house had the best snacks, which sounds stupid, but genuinely mattered at 13. Most days looked the same. We'd wake up late, text each other, meet up at whoever's house made the most sense that day, and then drift around the neighborhood for hours. We rode bikes a lot. There wasn't anything else to do. The nearest movie theater was about 4 miles away, and none of us had money, so we'd just ride, sometimes down to the creek behind the elementary school, sometimes out to the gas station on Route 40 to buy Gatorades and sit on the curb in the shade like we owned the place. That's what we were doing that day, coming back from the gas station. Each of us had a drink. Tyler had a bag of chips, and Marcus was doing some something dumb on his bike. Riding with no hands, I think, or trying to pop a wheelie. It was early afternoon. A Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. The road we were on wasn't a major road, but it wasn't a quiet residential street either. 2 lanes, no sidewalk for a stretch, a posted speed limit of 35 that most people ignored. We were riding single file along the right edge of the road, close to the shoulder. I was in the middle. Tyler was ahead of me, Marcus behind. We weren't doing anything out of the ordinary, just riding home. I heard the truck before I saw it. Not the engine, or at least not in a way that registered at first. It was more the sound of tires on pavement, a specific kind of sound, the kind you hear when someone accelerates hard and fast on a dry road. I turned my head out of instinct and saw a white pickup truck coming up behind us. Full size. I don't remember the make. It was moving fast, way too fast for a residential road. Tyler had already moved further to the right. I started to do the same. I figured it was just some impatient guy who was going to blow past us and probably honk. That happened sometimes. People got annoyed at bikes on the road. It was nothing new. But the truck didn't move to pass us. It stayed in our lane. I had maybe 2 seconds to process what was happening before the truck was on top of us. I yanked my bike hard to the right. I don't even remember making the decision. My body just did it and went half off the road into the gravel shoulder. Tyler did the same. Marcus was behind me and he swerved left without thinking. The truck flew past us. It missed Tyler completely. It missed me mostly. But the side mirror, or the edge of the cab, I still don't know exactly what, caught my right arm, not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough that I felt it, a hot stinging graze that left a mark for about 2 weeks. I nearly went over my handlebars from the surprise of it, more than the actual impact. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. We all ended up stopped at the side of the road. Tyler had dumped his bike into the grass at the edge of someone's yard. Marcus was standing with his bike between his legs, looking back down the road. I was still gripping my handlebars, staring at my arm where there was already a red mark forming. None of us said anything for a moment. Then Tyler went, "What the? Did that just happen?" Marcus said, "He didn't even slow down." I looked up and the truck was already a couple 100 feet away, brake lights still off, still moving fast, and then something happened that changed the whole thing for me. That made it go from a close call to something else entirely. The truck slowed down. Not to stop, not to pull over and check on us. It just reduced speed, like the driver was thinking. And then, slowly, it began to turn around. I watched it happen. In the middle of the road, no driveway, no intersection, the truck did a wide, deliberate U-turn and started coming back toward us. "Go," Marcus said. We went. I don't think we'd ever ridden our bikes that fast in our lives. Tyler was ahead, and he cut left into a side street, and we followed him without any kind of plan. We were just moving. My arm was throbbing and my lungs were burning, and I could hear gravel and Marcus behind me breathing hard. I looked back once, and the truck was on the street behind us, not racing, not gunning the engine, just following, steadily, like it had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Tyler turned again, cutting through a gap between two houses, barely wide enough for a bike, and into the open space behind the neighborhood that backed up to a stretch of trees. It wasn't really woods, more like a thick tree line that ran between our neighborhood and the next one over. We called it the woods because we were 13 and it felt like the woods. We used to cut through it all the time. We ditched our bikes at the edge of the trees and went in on foot. There was a path we knew, packed dirt, roots sticking up, enough canopy that the light went dim almost immediately. We got maybe 50 yards in and stopped behind a cluster of trees, crouching, trying to catch our breath without making noise. Through the trees, back at the edge of the neighborhood, I could see the truck. It had stopped near where we'd left our bikes. The engine was still running. I could see the exhaust in the air. Then the door opened. I grabbed Tyler's arm without thinking. Marcus pressed himself against the tree he was crouching behind. The driver got out. I couldn't see him clearly enough to give you a real description. A man, average build, I think, wearing something dark. He stood next to the truck for a moment, looking toward the tree line. Then he reached back into the cab of the truck and pulled something out. I couldn't tell what it was from where I was. Something long, maybe a bat, maybe something else. I genuinely don't know, and I've thought about it 100 times since. He stood there for what felt like a long time, looking at the trees, looking at where we had gone. None of us moved. I don't think any of us breathed. The air in that tree line was thick and hot and smelled like dirt and dead leaves. I was aware of every sound, a bird somewhere above us, the distant hum of a lawnmower, a foul streets over my was steel steegi. I kept my eyes on the man. He took a few steps toward the tree line, stopped, took a few more. I thought about running deeper into the woods, but I was terrified of making noise. The path curved away behind us, and I didn't know if running would be smarter than staying still. Then, from somewhere in the neighborhood behind him, a car pulled onto the street. Another car, just a normal one, passing through, probably a neighbor. The man glanced back at it, and then, after a moment, he walked back to his truck, got in, sat there for another 30 seconds or so, and then he drove away. We didn't move for a long time after that, not right away. We stayed in the trees until Tyler finally said he thought it was okay, and even then none of us were sure. We eventually got back to our bikes and rode directly to Tyler's house without talking. His mom was home, and she came to the door when she heard us come in and immediately asked what was wrong, because apparently we all looked like we'd seen something she couldn't name. We told her what happened. She called Marcus's parents. They called my mom. Someone called the police. And a couple of officers came to Tyler's house and took a report. They were polite about it. One of them asked us questions, wrote things down. They asked about the truck, color, size, any numbers on the plates. And none of us had gotten the plate. We'd been too scared and too focused on getting away. I don't know what came of the report. My mom followed up with the police once, maybe twice, but nothing ever came back to us. No one was arrested. No one ever knocked on our door and said they'd found the guy. The truck was described as a full-size white pickup, which, if you know anything about Ohio's suburbs, is basically every third vehicle on the road. They had nothing. I've thought about it differently at different points in my life. At 13, the story I told myself was that it was a road rage thing. Some guy who hated kids on bikes, who scared us on purpose, who maybe followed us to keep scaring us, but didn't actually intend anything worse than that. It was the version that let me sleep. But here's the thing. The more I've sat with it as an adult, the less that version holds up. Road rage is impulsive. It flares up and burns out fast. It doesn't look like a U-turn in the middle of a residential street. It doesn't look like a slow, deliberate follow through a neighborhood. It doesn't look like pulling a weapon out of your cab and walking toward a tray line where three kids just disappeared. I don't know what that man intended. I genuinely don't. But I know that a near miss with an angry driver and what actually happened that afternoon are two different things, and only one of them is the story I told for a long time. Tyler moved away the following year. Marcus and I stayed in the neighborhood through high school, but never really talked about it again. I ran into him at a grocery store a few years back. We're both adults now, both living different lives, and we made small talk for a few minutes before he said, kind of out of nowhere, "You ever think about that summer with the truck?" I told him, "Yeah, I think about it." He nodded, didn't say anything else about it. We said goodbye and went our separate ways. I still don't know who that man was. I don't know if he lived nearby. I don't know if he'd done something like that before or after. I don't know what he would have done if that car hadn't come down the street at the exact moment it did. I just know that we made it out, and sometimes that's the part that bothers me most. I've never really figured out the right way to talk about what happened to Derek. Most people, when they hear it, assume it was a hit and run, some drunk driver, a dark road, a terrible accident, and I used to let people think that because the real version, the version I actually believe happened, is harder to explain, harder to sit with. It doesn't have the clean edges that accidents have. It doesn't make sense the way accidents eventually make sense after enough time passes. Derek was one of my closest friends through most of high school. We met freshman year in gym class, which is maybe the least dignified place two people can form a friendship, but that's how it happened. We were both terrible at volleyball, and we bonded over that. By sophomore year, we were spending most weekends together, his house, my house, driving around when he got his license, sitting in parking lots, eating fast food, and talking about nothing in particular the way you do when you're 16 and the world feels both enormous and incredibly small at the same time. He was a good person. I want to make sure I say that clearly, because sometimes when people hear a story like this, the person at the center of it gets reduced to just the thing that happened to them. Derek was funny, not in a loud, performative way, more dry, understated. He'd say something so quietly that you'd almost miss it, and then it would hit you 3 seconds later. He was into cars, old ones specifically, and he used to drag me to swap meets on Saturday mornings where I had no idea what anything was, and he'd explain it all with genuine patience. We were both juniors when it happened. 17, late October, I think, maybe early November. The nights were already cold and the leaves had mostly come down. I remember that detail because of what the road looked like afterward when I heard about it. Wet leaves on asphalt. That image stuck. It was a Friday night. We'd been at a party, not a wild one, just a handful of people at someone's house whose parents were out of town. Nothing serious. There was beer. I won't pretend otherwise, but Derek wasn't drunk. I know because I watched him nurse the same drink for 2 hours. He was talking to a girl he liked, and he was focused on that, not on drinking. That mattered to me later. When people started suggesting explanations, I left before he did. I had a curfew my parents actually enforced, and he didn't. The last time I saw him that night, he was standing in someone's kitchen laughing. I told him I'd text him in the morning. He never texted back. His mom called my mom sometime, The next afternoon, I was still half asleep when my mom came into my room, and I knew from the way she opened the door, slowly, like she was being careful, that something was wrong. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me there'd been an accident, that Derek had been hurt, that he hadn't made it. I don't remember exactly what I said. I don't think I said much. The story we got in the days that followed was fragmented. Pieces from different places, Derek's family, people at the party who knew more than I did, eventually some of what came out in the police report. The picture that assembled itself was this. Derek had left the party on foot. The house was only about 1.5 miles from his, and he'd walked it before. There was a stretch of road along the way that didn't have a sidewalk, just a narrow shoulder and a ditch. He was walking along that stretch sometime after midnight when a car hit him. That was the version people accepted. A hit and run, a dark road, a driver who panicked, the worst kind of accident. But then the autopsy report came back. Derek's family shared some of what was in it. Not the clinical language, just what the medical examiner had told them. And what they said didn't match a hit and run. The injuries weren't consistent with a single impact at speed. What the examiner described, in terms I had to have explained to me, were injuries that came from sustained, repeated pressure, like being driven over slowly, like someone had gone over him more than once, at low speed, with deliberate control of the vehicle. He had crawled afterward. They knew this because of where he was found versus where the initial impact must have occurred. He had moved himself probably feet, maybe more, toward the side of the road, and based on what they could determine, he had been alive for some period of time after. Hours, possibly. Hours. I've spent a long time trying not to think too hard about those hours, about whether he was conscious, about whether he understood what had happened. I don't let myself go too far down that road. The police investigated. Of course they did. They found tire marks eventually, though the rain that night and the wet leaves made it difficult to get much from them. They canvassed for witnesses. They looked at vehicles in the area, as far as I know, and I followed this as closely as a 17-year-old could, and then later as an adult who knew how to actually look into things. No one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. The case went cold. It might still technically be open. I'm honestly not sure. What stayed with me, what I couldn't reconcile, was the question of why. Because here's the thing about a hit and run, even a cowardly one, even the worst version, it's still an accident. The car hits someone, the driver panics, they drive away. The physics of that are fast, it's over in a second. What the evidence described wasn't that. What the evidence described required someone to stop or slow to almost nothing and make a choice more than once. It required awareness. It required intention. I didn't know Derek to have enemies. He wasn't involved in anything. He wasn't the kind of person who attracted that kind of attention. He was a 17-year-old kid who liked old cars and had a dry sense of humor and was trying to work up the nerve to ask a girl to homecoming. Nothing about him explained what happened. I've thought about the random possibility that it was someone who didn't know him at all, someone who was out that night and saw a person walking alone on a dark road and made a decision that I will never fully understand. That version is somehow worse because it means there was no logic to it, no reason, just a person, a road, and someone who chose to do what they did. About 2 years after it happened, I got a call from a detective who had apparently been reassigned to Derek's case as part of some review of older unsolved cases in the county. He asked me questions I didn't have answers to. Had Derek mentioned anyone following him, anyone threatening him, any conflict I might not have known about? I told him everything I knew, which wasn't much. He thanked me and said he'd be in touch if anything developed. He never called back. Derek's mom still lives in the same house. I know this because I drove past it a few years ago, not on purpose, just passing through the old neighborhood. There was a wind chime on the porch that I didn't remember being there before. I don't know why that detail hit me the way it did. I went to a lot of trouble at different points to believe the accident version. It's easier, it lets you grieve in a way that has some kind of shape to it. Accidents are terrible, but they have a category. They fit somewhere in the way you understand the world. Someone drove over my friend and then drove over him again. And then they drove away and they went home, presumably, and they make miles of where it happened. They might live across the country. They might have done something like it again, or they might not have. There's no way to know. The case number still exists somewhere in a filing cabinet or a database. There's a record of Derek's name attached to it, but there's no name attached to what happened to him. There probably never will be. I think about him most in the fall. Something about the cold and the wet and the leaves coming down. It's not something I planned, it just happens. I'll be driving somewhere on a dark October night, and I'll pass a stretch of road with no sidewalk, just a narrow shoulder and a ditch in the tree line close on both sides, and I'll feel it. I don't have an explanation for what happened. I'm not sure I ever will, but I know it wasn't an accident, and I know that whoever was behind that wheel that night made a choice. Slowly, deliberately, in the dark, on a quiet road, with nobody watching. And then they drove away like it was nothing. Looking back, I think the thing that unsettles me most isn't the car itself. It's how long it took us to realize what we were actually looking at, because it wasn't immediate. It wasn't one dramatic moment that made everything obvious. It was slow, gradual, the kind of thing that builds so quietly in the background of your normal life that by the time you finally name it out loud, you realize it's been there for months. And then you start doing the math on all those months, and that's when it gets hard to shake. This was the late 90s. I was 11, maybe 12 at the start of it, right in that window where you're old enough to have real independence, but young enough that adults don't take your instincts seriously. We lived in a quiet subdivision in central Georgia. Not rural, not urban, just that particular American in-between, cul-de-sacs and ranch houses, and a neighborhood pool that smelled too strongly of chlorine. Streets with names like Willow Creek Drive and Briarwood Court that sounded peaceful and meant nothing. There were 5 or 6 of us who ran together that summer. A loose group, the way neighborhood kid groups always are. Not a formal thing, just the kids whose yards backed up against each other and who drifted in and out of each other's days, depending on who was home and who was grounded and whose mom had snacks. My closest friends in the group were a girl named Ashley and a kid we all called Benji, whose actual name was Benjamin, but who had gone by Benji since before any of us could remember. We rode bikes constantly. This was pre-smartphones, pre-YouTube, pre-anything that would have kept us inside. So the bikes were how we moved. We had a circuit we did almost every day, out of the neighborhood, down the main road to the gas station, sometimes over to the park, 2 subdivisions away, sometimes just loops through our own streets, for no reason at all. We knew every crack in the sidewalk. We knew which driveways had dogs, and which neighbors would wave and which ones would stare. I don't remember exactly when I first noticed the car. That's part of what makes it difficult to explain. There wasn't a specific day I can point to. It was more like one afternoon, I became aware that a car had been parked at the corner of our street for a while, and then the next time I noticed it, it was somewhere else, and then eventually I started paying attention. It was a sedan. Older, American-made, white, or a very pale gray. The color of something that had been white once and weathered. Not a junker exactly, but not well maintained either. The kind of car that's invisible because it's so thoroughly ordinary. No bumper stickers, no distinguishing marks that I can remember. It just looked like a car that belonged to someone who lived somewhere nearby. Except, it never seemed to be parked in the same place twice. And it didn't seem to belong to anyone on our street or the adjacent ones. And after a while, we started to notice that it appeared when we were out on our bikes. Not every time. That's important. It wasn't every single ride, which is part of why it took so long to become a real concern. If it had shown up every single time from the very beginning, one of us would have said something to a parent immediately. But it was intermittent, inconsistent enough that each individual sighting could be explained away. Ashley was the first one who said anything out loud about it. We were coming back from the park one afternoon. The four of us spread out across the bike lane, and she said something like, "Is that the same car from yesterday?" And I looked over, and there it was, parked along the road about a block ahead of us, just sitting there. I'd seen it before, but hadn't said anything because I wasn't sure if I was imagining the pattern. After Ashley said it, we started paying attention on purpose. And once we were paying attention, there was no explaining it away. It was always the same car, same faded pale color, same older body style, same quality of just sitting there without obvious purpose. Sometimes it was parked, sometimes, and this is the part that made my stomach drop the first time I registered it, it was moving. Slowly. At the pace of people on bikes, we started clocking it, not in any organized way, just noticing. Benji was the most methodical about it. He'd spot the car and watch it while the rest of us tried to act normal, and then afterward he'd describe what he'd seen. The car would appear about a block back. It would follow our route. When we turned, it turned. When we stopped, it stopped or slowed to a crawl or pulled to the side. It never came close enough to feel like it was bearing down on us. It just maintained that distance, that constant, patient distance. A few times we tried to shake it. We'd cut through parking lots or take a sudden turn onto a street that wasn't part of our normal route, just to see what happened. More than once, we lost sight of the car, and for a few minutes we'd think we'd imagined the whole thing, or that it was just coincidence, and then we'd come out onto a main road, and there it would be again, waiting, almost, just slightly ahead of where we'd emerged, like it had anticipated which way we'd come out. I started having trouble sleeping. I didn't tell my mom why at first. I was 11, and I didn't know how to explain something that still felt maybe like paranoia. But I lay awake some nights running through what we'd seen, trying to find the innocent explanation. Maybe it was someone who drove that route regularly. Maybe it was someone who lived nearby and we just didn't know their car. Maybe we were 11 and 12 years old, and we were turning nothing into something because we'd all watched too many crime shows. I wanted it to be nothing. Then Benji got the plate number. He'd planned it out on his own without telling the rest of us. One afternoon when the car was parked, really parked, engine off, sitting at the end of a street it had no business being on, he rode past it, slow, and memorized the plate, came and found us afterward and said, "I got it." His parents called the police that evening. We all sat in their living room while his dad made the call. I remember the feeling in that room. The specific quality of adults taking something seriously that you've been carrying around for months. It was a relief, and also somehow more frightening, because when adults start taking something seriously, you understand that you were right to be scared. The officer called back within a day or two. The plates didn't match the car. That's the part I've come back to more times than I can count. The plates didn't belong to that vehicle. Whoever was driving that car had put plates on it that didn't correspond to the registration, which means they'd either stolen the plates off another car or they'd obtained fake ones somehow, or... And this is the version that made Benji's dad go very quiet when the officer explained it. They were using plates from a car of similar enough appearance that a casual check might not catch it immediately. The officer said they'd look into it. They took the description of the vehicle. They said they'd increase patrols in the area. I don't know if they did. What I know is that after Benji's parents made the call, We stopped riding bikes the way we used to, not a formal decision, not something any parent sat us down and announced. It just happened naturally. Suddenly there were more reasons to stay inside, more reasons to ride only when an adult was around, or only to the end of the block and back. And the car, or at least our awareness of it, faded. I don't know if it stopped coming around. I don't know if whoever was driving it saw the increased police presence and moved on, or realized we'd noticed, or just lost interest. I don't know if they found another neighborhood, another group of kids with a predictable route. I think about that sometimes. The idea of predictability. We had a route we rode almost every single day. We were consistent. We were easy to map. Whoever was in that car had spent enough time watching us that they knew our patterns better than we probably did. They knew which roads we took. They knew approximately what time we'd be out. They knew how to stay just far enough back to feel invisible. That level of familiarity requires time. It requires patience. It requires watching and watching and watching and never making a move. I've never known what to make of that, whether it meant they were waiting for the right moment, whether the right moment almost came at some point and we didn't know it, whether it was ever as close as the car being 30 feet behind us on an empty road on a Tuesday afternoon when the neighborhood was quiet and nobody was watching. I don't know what they wanted. The assumption, the one that lives in the back of my head and always has, is kidnapping. I don't have evidence for that. It's just the thing that fits the behavior, the patience, the false plates, the specific focus on a group of kids with a known routine. Ashley moved away the summer after. Her family relocated for her dad's job. I saw her once after that, years later, at a mutual friends thing, and we talked for a while. At some point, she brought up the car. She said she still thought about it sometimes. She said she'd Googled things over the years, missing kids, unsolved cases, that kind of thing, looking for anything that might connect. She never found anything, or nothing she could be certain about. Maybe that means nothing ever happened. Maybe it means we were lucky. Maybe it means whoever was in that car got what they were looking for somewhere else, and we just never heard about it. Those three possibilities sit in very different places inside me. I'm an adult now. I have kids of my own. And I'll tell you honestly, the neighborhood we live in is nice, quiet, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. My kids ride bikes. They have a route they like. They're consistent about it. I find myself watching for cars I don't recognize. Not obsessively, not in a way that runs my life. But it's there. A low-level awareness that wasn't there before that summer. An understanding that ordinary-looking things can be patient. That danger doesn't always announce itself. That sometimes it just circles quietly at a distance, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes before that moment comes, you get lucky. I got lucky. I just wish I knew for certain that's all it was.